Hello everyone. Many of you have been asking where we've been for the winter months.
Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. Here is a short presentation of our experiences with YWAM. Here is our journey with YWAM for the last 3 months of 2019 and January and February of 2020. So how did we get to YWAM? Many of you will know that I've been memorizing and presenting scripture, mainly John's Gospel, for some time now. Last year I found out that YWAM actually teaches this as a course, so I went to Lucerne in Switzerland to do Ephesians. I thoroughly enjoyed the teaching, but was blown away by YWAM itself, their passion for Jesus, their sense of community, and their commitment to mission and outreach. I always thought YWAM was for young people, but I found out that they also do a Crossroads course for older people. So when I got home and talked about it and prayed about it with Jill, and we shared it with people who have input into our lives, 5 weeks later we were on a plane to Kona in Hawaii.
After 11 hours of flying, we touched down in Hawaii on September the 26th and were introduced to the campus. It was the most beautiful design. It was only 10 minutes walk away from the beach. The international flavour was evident from the very beginning at the entrance, where there's an imposing circle of different flags surrounded 3 sculptures which reinforced the YWAM vision, to know God and to make him known. The breathtaking views never cease to amaze us and point us to our Creator. And although the high temperatures and humidity were a challenge, we eventually did acclimatise. This is the view from one of the houses where we were. And sunsets like this one were unveiled for our admiration every evening, so cameras were always at the ready. The sense of family in the YWAM community is very strong. Everyone displayed a genuine interest in each other, irrespective of age or nationality. So mealtimes were special, and students were ready to talk on a very deep level to each other. Most people on the course were single and shared dormitory-style accommodation. As one of a handful of married couples, we were privileged to benefit from this stylish apartment, complete with its own balcony and sea view. We really couldn't believe that we had come to be training in missions. It was just so beautiful. Before lectures began in earnest, there was a day of immersion into Hawaiian culture with dances from local talent. Here is an example of the Hawaiian language you may not be familiar with. The children also share their parents' pride in their Polynesian roots and customs, such as blowing special horns. So through flag processions, children's displays, and national costume, we became familiar with this new culture. On entering the worship area, I was once greeted by these locals doing their utmost to make me feel welcome. A very colourful sight. Although the daily schedules were packed and many Saturdays were given to writing in our journals, there were some unforgettable trips to the beach. Here I experienced bodyboarding for the first time and found it utterly exhilarating. So in this atmosphere of community, beauty and mission, we learnt the YWAM principles of firstly, hear God, secondly, obey, and thirdly, don't give up. This is the 24/7 prayer room where we spent some memorable hours. It was extremely popular for prayer and worship, and we were each given opportunities to take some slots. And in this particular moment, we were trying the harp and bowl style out. We continually rubbed shoulders with people who had given up everything to attend their YWAM course. They'd sold their cars, homes, and left their jobs. They demonstrated infectious, reckless faith and we imbibed this atmosphere of expectation and trust without trying. We heard from speakers from every part of the globe, inspiring us with up-to-date stories of God's power to transform. Every week began at 8 o'clock with worship for everyone in the big Ohana court. It was quite unforgettable, worshipping with about 1,000 people. And of course, because it was so international, we had a variety of different languages and styles. For example, French, and especially the Nigerian one I shall always remember, with the dancing to go with it. We were given the opportunity to choose tracks, and I chose the music track. And so we had different experiences each week, like songwriting. But at one point, we actually had the opportunity to perform together and rehearse for a gospel choir. This was really good fun. And so some of our group had never really done something like this. Anyway, here we are, ready to perform on the big Ohana Court stage. And this is my small group. And now for the first ever experience of Thanksgiving. It was such a delicious feast. Coffee farms populated the hills of this microclimate. And so this was a very favourite spot for us to have lovely views and just to relax a bit. I often played outside, as you can see in this shot. And finally, here are the 3 lads that I taught in an after-school club every week. They were so funny. We had a real laugh, and they had a lot of fun writing their own songs. Absolutely hilarious.
For the first 3 months, we were on an intensive training program. Every week we had a teacher or couple flown in from various parts of the world. Although for us, a lot of it wasn't brand new material, there was a sense of vibrancy because these guys were on the front line actually doing the stuff. We covered topics like our relationship with God and hearing Him through that relationship. The key thing was to know Him more and understand the price Jesus paid for us, which reflects our significance to Him. We had teaching and ministry time to be freed up emotionally and spiritually, so we were free to help others know that freedom. We had teaching on being pure in heart and on deliverance, especially our role in spiritual warfare. The enemy is terrified we will discover who we really are before God and will do anything to prevent us coming into that. We had sessions on how to renew our minds and how the cross severs the roots of our independence. One of the key challenges was, are we prepared to go wherever God calls us? Putting it bluntly, is Jesus worth it? That's a big question which we all have to settle in our own hearts. We had good teaching on evangelism in preparation for the outreach phase in Cambodia. 86% of conversions come from personal evangelism, and 80 to 85% are saved before they are 25 years old. We talked about the stages of a person's spiritual journey: the hard ground, the planting of the seed, the appearing of the plant, the head of the plant, and then the harvest. We're probably only at one point in that person's journey. Our job is to share in the power of the Spirit and leave the outcome to God. We looked at strategies. Paul would go to a synagogue and debate and share and listen. But that didn't work when he went to Athens, so he had another strategy: to quote from people of a secular mindset to connect with his audience. So how do we prepare our own strategies for the situations we find ourselves in? The challenge was to live a lifestyle of evangelism so we were ready for every eventuality. We were privileged to have 3 German ladies with strong prophetic ministries come and pray with us as a couple. They didn't ask any questions, just wanted to listen to the Lord for us, and confirmed a number of things in our lives and our joint giftings. If you think the program was all word-based teaching, take a look at this. The final stage of that period was a wonderful celebratory meal held in a country house that YWAM has access to, giving us a really good send-off for the next phase to go to Cambodia. This is me doing a word-by-heart presentation on the love of God from 1 Corinthians 13 and 1 John 4 as a send-off gift for the various YWAM teams.
We'd like to introduce you to some of the amazing examples of God's creation that we experienced. I had thought that following Jesus involved mostly surrender and hardship, but the privilege of marvelling at these sights with nothing but delight. Firstly, the sea. Psalm 93 talks about God's power being like the boundless, relentless waves. We spent a lot of time gazing at the water, reflecting on God's majesty and the consistency of his love. So much excuse for reflection and meditation. Hawaii's flowers create a kaleidoscope of colour all year round. Bougainvillea and banyan trees were commonplace. I'll always remember my first trip to a picturesque local beach. Maybe you can just make out the seal swimming towards the shore. Quite unforgettable. And here's a snapshot of a memorable day spent in the Botanical Gardens at Hilo on the east side of the island. It was like being in a rainforest. A group of us went away for a weekend. It was a very special time. Some, like orchids, were recognisable, but there were a lot of plants that we had no idea what they were called. These little birds congregated everywhere, and they were very tame, but unfortunately nobody seemed to have a name for them. Now, one member of our team in Crossroads was called Sam, and he was a professional photographer. And one day, while a group of us stood about half a mile away from the shore, we quickly asked him to come because we saw, yes, it is true, whales and baby whales. So he grabbed his drone and he enabled us to see these incredible whales swimming so gracefully in the dazzling ocean. So this was quite a surprise doggy bag souvenir on the last 2 days before we returned home. And we were talking about it for a long time to come. So back to the Botanical Gardens, and here's another array of unusual flowers and foliage, some which were more recognisable. Bird of Paradise, for example. And this is one of a number of falls that forced a deluge of water cascading down from great heights. It was a loud, sparkling experience. So from pawpaw trees to frangipani, a feast for the eyes wherever we looked. I wonder if you can identify this. It's a macadamia nut, crushed and made into chocolates for the delight of tourists and locals alike. No, these aren't gooseberries, they are coffee beans. A large part of Kona's revenue comes from the production of Kona coffee, exported worldwide. Coffee farms invited visitors to witness the many stages involved, from picking to final packaging. Taking a stroll by the shore one day, I was so excited to see this activity very close to where I was standing. Yes, there were frolicking dolphins, showing off their latest backflips. I was fortunate enough to swim close to some dolphins myself on another occasion, and I could hear their strange underwater hum. Very special. Geckos became our best friends. They would distract us in lectures as we spotted them walking along the ceiling. Unlike cockroaches, they were very friendly. From gazing up at the sunsets, we plunged down to the depths to snorkel. A great fun activity. And here's a lonely crab I discovered. The underworld of coral and varieties of fish was a startling first-time experience. I almost felt guilty encroaching on their fascinating world. Turtles could often be found sunbathing on the rocks, minding their own business like this one. I'll never forget the thrill of realizing once that as I was swimming, alongside me there was this huge turtle, and we swam together for about 20 minutes. Such wonderful experiences as part of mission.
We're going to move now to our outreach portion of the course. We flew from Hawaii to Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, on the 15th of December. Cambodia was originally a royal kingdom, but in the late 19th, early 20th century came under French colonial rule. During World War II, the French collaborated with the Japanese, so the Japanese didn't really get too involved with Cambodia. In the early 1950s, Cambodia became an independent nation again, but there was a lot of conflict in the 1970s, leading to the Khmer Rouge takeover in 1975. They forced all the inhabitants out of the major cities to create an agrarian egalitarian society. The majority of former military personnel and the professional classes were executed, including people who had soft hands or wore glasses. In 4 years, the Khmer Rouge almost destroyed Cambodia. Pol Pot was the man in charge, and this is the entrance gate to one of the main killing field museums. In one generation, youngsters were taken from the fields in the north and trained to kill at their commander's orders. Cambodians are very gentle, kind people, so to turn one sector of the same nation against another was a terrible form of social manipulation. In the early 1980s, the North Vietnamese invaded and ran the country till they were expelled 10 years later in the 1990s. The country is now ruled by a president who was a former leader in the Khmer Rouge army. The country has tried to get back to what was familiar, its traditions, Buddhism, being very conservative, and having a very risk-averse view of politics. Even now, people disappear if they speak out against those in power. One of the things that strikes you first is the poverty. Most of the businesses in the big cities are small shop fronts opening straight out onto the pavement. The food shops cooked right on the road. The larger markets sold everything from fruit and vegetables to clothes and flip-flops. The meat and fish stalls were usually deeper into the market itself, and you could smell them long before you got there. This slide shows the landmine design, a trust set up to help people incapacitated by landmines and give them a chance to earn a living. There are still some areas that haven't been totally cleared of landmines. An example of some of the amazing hats they wore: cutting up jackfruit, fishermen on the Mekong River. This lady was very friendly and got talking to us on a ferry trip to the Silk Island. She showed us round her own silk weaving business in her house on the island. Here is one of the looms showing the actual process. And this is an example of the intricate patterns they weave. This was our tuk-tuk driver for the day. He was a great guy and we had some fun with him, and he only just got all of us in. This is Simon, who worked in a restaurant called Jan Bai, which helped finance an NGO working with orphanages. Most of the meals we had in Cambodia were stir-fries. The classic dish was beef lok lok, which had a fried egg on top. This left Jill yearning for an English apple crumble. Water is a big issue. In the countryside, they rely on the monsoon rains to fill small local reservoirs, from which they get their water for the rest of the year. But they are all nearly dried up as they haven't had any rains for 2 years. Most houses have these huge water pots for storing water at their homes. These 2 slides give an insight into their kitchens. Typically, this room would lead out onto an open-air concrete plinth that would be their main living area.
A group of 12 of us from our DTS course finally embarked on this outreach phase. We represented 5 different nationalities and quickly realised that we had very different personalities, so we needed to do a lot of team building if we were to function well. You may wonder how we survived without being able to speak the Khmer language. It's a very difficult language, not only to speak, but also to read. Even Cambodians take about 6 years to master it. Thankfully, we often had translators with us. Otherwise, we had to make do with expressions such as sok subai, which seemed to do the trick in most situations. Based in the capital, Phnom Penh, our first insights came through organisations for victims of sex trafficking, which is a huge problem in Cambodia and beyond. An introduction to the work of Agape International Ministries left us full of admiration. A street which was once full of brothels has gradually been transformed into a vibrant community where abused girls find their lives turned around through love. There is counselling for them, employment from jewellery making and sewing, and there's a lifelong commitment to care for these people for the rest of their lives. There's a new school as well run by Christians for children in the locality, and that's got a powerful witness. Our involvement was through an organisation called Why Not Now. We made friends with the wounded girls at the Esther House, which was a safe house for victims aged from about 8 till 21. We played games, even made them skirts, and did some hands-on DIY. This is a room that we decorated, complete with mural. Here is the Christmas presentation. And here are some of the delightful children that we got to know. We knew nothing of the pain and trauma these girls had experienced, but were pleased to offer prayer and wash their feet with a simple bottle of water. They were deeply touched, and I was privileged to play as the Holy Spirit met them in their brokenness and need. The mamas caring for them were equally responsive. Ten days later, we travelled north to Battambang and joined the YWAM base there in some of their outreach activities. Over the month of January, we visited local poor villages, presenting the gospel to over 2,000 people altogether. And about 200 responded with a commitment to follow Jesus, an amazing outcome in such a Buddhist culture. As part of our contribution, I was invited to play my viola, an instrument they'd never seen or heard of, so it was always a novelty wherever we went. Children would listen attentively to the Christmas presentation for a few hours, and the grandparents were also invited. Besides words and song, we demonstrated God's love through meeting their physical needs too. The children were so delightful, and they were always beaming with joy and attentive to what we had to say. At the end, instead of all surging in a rush and making a dive for the freebies, the children formed a queue and respectfully received a Bible in their own language and some relevant literature. They were so grateful for the most basic of foods, such as bread and rice, and we were taken aback as each received by putting their hands together as if praying and bowing reverently afterwards. It was a moving experience. Later, we travelled to a tiny village in a very remote area called Sisipong. The community was drawn from those who had come out from hiding in the jungle following the Khmer Rouge atrocity. Some fled naked, most had no teeth, and they were in desperate need. Typical of numerous villages, water was scarce necessity. This tanker was delivering to a school. Just $10 would provide a family for a month, but money was so scarce. School was at least somewhere where there was a source of clean water for the children to drink. It really was a sobering experience to think what we take for granted every day. This girl is my takeaway picture from the entire trip. We jumped out of the bus to be engulfed by school children, hungry for a hug and love. This girl grabbed hold of me and wouldn't let me go for a long, long time. Language wasn't necessary. Her need made me weep. A memory keepsake. This classroom shows how many of the grandparents arrived to be part of this special occasion when Westerners were coming to the school. Most parents worked very long hours in Thailand, so the care of the children fell to these devoted women, the grandmothers. Generational ties were really strong. Unable to engage through speech, I was at least able to communicate through the power of music, and very soon they were clapping along. Another opportunity to serve took us to this disused railway site where the buildings were inhabited by a community who were drug addicts and spent their days gambling. We were deeply shocked. Few of the children went to school and their lives were devoid of love or basic provision. 7 years ago, a YWAM team began visiting each week, and we were privileged to join them. Children were invited out of those makeshift hovels and came together for games and Bible stories. Like the Pied Piper, I helped extract the children and gather them onto a large outdoor area where they received acceptance and love. They heard the music and were curious to follow this musical sound and gaze at my viola, absolutely fascinated. This girl particularly won our hearts over. Here's Kevan telling them some stories with very necessary translation. This was a good day, but their moods were extremely variable.
And pray to him and ask Jesus to come into our lives. God is very happy. Thank you.
Prior to our arrival, I was told that we would be giving the children a shower. I could never have imagined this experience. The children stripped off and allowed us to wash their hair and pour bowls of cold water over them. What a transformation to see the grime reveal shiny, bright faces, probably their only wash for the week. And now for a different experience. Can you work out what this is? Twice a day, millions of bats emerge from this cave and fly in a circular loop. A great crowd puller and a very memorable spectacle. This is a huge trash tip. The rising smoke is burning plastic, which smelt unbearable. An English doctor comes each week to treat people who live in these appalling conditions. Our work again involved children, keeping them occupied and stimulated while their parents were receiving medical treatment. This shows their lesson in how to wash their hands. And here's a boy who took a particular shine to Kevan. After eating their apples, there was a lull in the proceedings, and I will never forget the experience of singing worship songs over these 3 girls as they lay on the floor and completely went to sleep. So different to their trash dump lifestyle. Such beautiful, innocent faces. A complete plentiful contrast now, a range of possible produce, although I have to say we did decline the barbecued dog. This is the wife of a local pastor preparing her weekly food parcels for distribution in the nearby hospital. The experience of visiting this hospital will be permanently etched on our memories. We were horrified at the insights into the plight of sick Cambodians. Nothing was provided except a wooden slatted board for a bed, no sheets, no food, and some patients had to lie outside even. Very few doctors were available, and the overall level of cleanliness was shocking. Here in the neonatal section, our hearts went out to these premature babies, starting life on makeshift beds without any prospect of an incubator or feeding tube if necessary. The experience brought a sense of both pain and privilege. One of our last team presentations was in another poor village. Besides sketches and stories, we drew from songs like this one learnt back in the Kona classroom, came in very useful. It's the Cha-Cha song. In yet another impoverished community, we joined in a weekly meeting and met an American whose family have moved here to give their support to the local pastor. We were pleased to help staff in this well-organised and receptive school. The children achieved very high standards. Here's an example of Kevan doing his word by heart with the help of an interpreter in a local church.
Jesus needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus therefore sat thus by the well, because he was wearied from his journey. And it was about midday. A woman of Samaria came to draw water.
Pleased to get to know this delightful minister known as Pastor Timothy. We were so impressed with his commitment to the small flock in his church and those in many rural areas where he would spend time with small groups, such as this extended family. They heard him speak and sang hymns together, sometimes with viola accompaniment as well. His church surroundings were in a desperate state of repair. We soon realised that the roof was about to collapse, and the cooking facilities were really inadequate for the ministry they envisaged with other people. We were very pleased to contribute some funds through YWAM and donations, and by the time we left, a considerable progress had been made. Here's the new roof they're putting on. This shot was taken in one of the bubble bars where I had some amazing conversations with young people. I would have preferred an Americano to their sweet teas made with condensed milk, but it was worth it to explain the gospel to many Buddhists who showed a genuine interest. As a team, we actually gave away over 1,000 Khmer Bibles by the time we left Cambodia. To end, here are a few shots of our team. This is us on Christmas Day with a difference. We didn't miss any of the usual frenzy and the trappings. Finally, a more formal moment of a team who achieved great things for the kingdom and were totally changed in the process. After 2 months in Cambodia, we were pleased to board the plane on February the 14th, just as the COVID awareness was heightening. It was a lengthy flight, especially wearing a mask, but it was so amazing to be back in Hawaii again. Reuniting with others from the Crossroads course made us realise what strong friendships we had made since we first met back in September, and how everyone had inwardly grown through the mission experience. We heard so many stories from the Vietnam and Malaysia team as well, and we realised how many insights we'd also shared, whether it was the good times or the more challenging times. We marvelled at the many people's lives touched by Jesus' love through us. Some students had changed in remarkable ways, having grown in confidence, faith, and a longing for future opportunities to serve Jesus. Our debrief sessions saw us back in the classroom reflecting on lessons learned alongside times of relaxation and fun. Our accommodation was at YWAM Ships, another part of the campus, situated a stone's throw from the beach. Towards the end of the time, we had about 4 days together, we became rather nostalgic. And these 3 lads who were in the same dormitory, they decided to use the excuse to entertain us, so there was a lot of hilarity thrown in as well. Another group decided to write a song, especially about us and YWAM.
You are sure to win for a mindless, pale, pathetic lot. And you haven't got a clue. Somehow they'll make YWAM out of you.
Graduation day finally arrived with a ceremony that deserved our best clothes. We received our certificates and many congratulations, topped by a special meal and photos. It really was a wonderful time as a send-off to all our experiences for 5 months. We only had 1 more day left before our flight, so we teamed up with some good friends that we'd made, Michelle and Chris. And after a meal, we had our final game of Quirkle, which we had played many, many times before. As a final trip around the island, we decided to have a coastal drive, and that ended us up at the Black Beach, which is quite famous too. And we were delighted, as we paid our respects to the final coastline, we were delighted to see some turtles. The flight home included a welcome detour, since we had 6 spare hours in San Francisco, just enough time to see some famous beauty spots, such as Alcatraz, and a quick trip even to the Storm Macy's.
So what can we take away from this experience? We've stepped aside from 37 years in the same locality, same church, with the UK culture and mindset. We left good friends, activities, beautiful surroundings. We left behind privileges such as water, fresh food, good air quality, and even an accountable government. When the familiar is stripped away, it forces you to think about priorities and values. We were surprised at how many of the so-called necessities were actually not so essential for fulfillment, and I could actually live without them. You're Worthy of It All is a song that we sang on the very first day, and it became a theme tune throughout the whole of the trip. The main outcome of the trip is that I love Jesus more than ever. It sounds simple to say it, but actually it's got life-changing implications. The John 15 vine image became extremely relevant to me. I do have a tendency to look, as it were, above the soil, looking for fruitfulness and growth. But I learnt to value the inner journey even more over activity. I found a new level of identity springing from ever-deepening roots below the ground. And this is, I think, what Jesus means about abiding. In Cambodia, we didn't see a lot of dramatic miracles or healings, even conversions. But what we did realise is that the fruitfulness ultimately is God's business.
So what is our response to 5 months out of our normal lives? For me, there are 2 key verses. The first one is Isaiah 45 verse 4, when God is calling Cyrus, and it says, "I have summoned you by name." So this was one of the main scriptures that actually convinced me it was right to go to Kona in the first place. And the second one is Jeremiah 20 verse 9, where the prophet says, "His word was in my heart like a burning fire, shut up in my bones." And this confirmed to me the gift of speaking out God's word from heart, particularly John's Gospel. Also, my personal journal has a picture torn from a magazine of a marlin being hooked and reeled in by the fishermen. I was going to tidy up the rough edges, but decided to leave it as it is to show the intense struggle of snatching someone out of hell. And this is what my journal actually looks like.
So what of the future? We feel fresh motivation to press on towards the heavenly goal, as Paul talks about in Philippians, to seek first his kingdom and also his justice, for example, the plight of the enslaved girls that we got to know. We've learnt that the journey really matters, not just the destination. In Exodus 4, God asks Moses, "What do you have in your hands?" And it was that staff that became the tool for God's power. That same question was asked of us once during a YWAM lecture, and the response seemed to be like one of those defining moments in our lives when we were really serious about sacrifice and surrendering to God's will. Likewise, the parable of the talents really motivated us to think what we have and how well we're using the gifts God has given us. Our shared objective became more and more to finish well. Personally, the trip reinforced my convictions of the value of music, along with the Holy Spirit, to really change people, to stir their hearts and to set them free. So to summarise, our hearts have been stirred and realigned in times of most extravagant worship. We've been both shocked and distressed at the horror of how children are abused, locked into a very corrupt regime. We've woken up to the poverty and helplessness and hopelessness, seeing it firsthand. It's been such a privilege to gain deeper insight into God's heart. So we now have a responsibility to ignore such things or face up to the ongoing reality. We've been changed forever. There's no looking back.
Paul says in 2 Timothy, "For I've already been poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is near." We don't know how many more active years we have, but we want to finish well, serving and ministering together. We went to Hawaii partly because of the international aspect, but also because Lauren and Darlene Cunningham, the founders of YWAM, are based there. Lauren shared his heart for completing the Great Commission and paving the way for Jesus' return. He and his team have tracked the rate of growth of Christianity over the last 100 years and demonstrate that it has grown exponentially relative to the growth of world population. There are 1,700 languages that still don't have even one portion of scripture in their mother tongue. YWAM and many other NGOs covering mission and Bible translation are working together with a sense of urgency to complete the task and end Bible poverty by 2033. The sense is that 2020 is the key year to accelerate this growth. How that is going to happen against what is going on in the world at the moment is not quite clear, but we've come away with an invitation to be part of the greatest move of God the world has ever seen.
So thank you all for joining us and sharing in our experiences.
And may God bless you all richly.
Bye.
Bye.